I am Brad Keelor. He is Daniel Pradel. Next up on Director's Cut, we're going to hear about his amazing trip to Palau. And I guess we'll ask 9 other questions too.
Ooh, crazy's what they think about me. Ain't gonna stop cause they tell me so. Cause 99 miles per hour, baby, is how fast that I like to go. Can't keep up with my rhythm.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keelor. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every single week, except during the summer and 1 week at the holidays, I sit down with a different GI member who has stories to tell. Some of them are personal, some are professional, and all of them are fun. If you don't know anything about the Geo-Institute, after you watch this today, head over to geoinstitute.org. You'll click, you'll scroll, you'll laugh, you'll cry. You'll find out that we're a technical society with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists, and that we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers. And if you like what you see today, and you should, you're going to hear some amazing stories about Palau again. So this is going to be good, everybody. Click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Now we're going to bend your mind a little bit because he's coming to us all the way from Tokyo, Japan. Faculty member at The Ohio State University, it is Daniel Pradel. He's also the chair of Geo-Extreme 2025, and we're going to hear a little bit about that later. Daniel, thank you for doing this from 10,000 miles away. We appreciate it.
Well, first of all, it's an honor, but it's always fun to watch Director's Cut, so I'm very glad to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. We have 10 questions, the same way that we do every week. 2 of them are the same, the way that we do it again every week, and we have to start with one of those. Describe your job in 45 seconds.
Well, I teach at The Ohio State University. I'm a professor of practice in geotech. Soon I'll be professor emeritus, and it's fantastic having seen the students go through the geotechnical lab, through the introduction to geotech, and then doing masters and PhDs. It's the best job I've had in my life.
So you said professor of practice, and there may be some people out there at different institutions saying to themselves, we don't distinguish, we're just all the same at my institution. Explain to everybody what professor of practice means.
Well, professor of practice is in many ways returning to the Ralph Peck type of period where you had to, I remember Ralph Peck telling me that Terzaghi told him, now you have enough experience, now you can teach. And in today's environment, professors, tenure track professors do a lot of research, but they may not have spent 5, 10, 15 years with very few exceptions in practice. And we're the ones who have seen the drillings, the dropping of the rebar cages in the drill shafts. And we can answer a lot of the questions that the students often have about why we do this way. Why is it different in, let's say, Utah than it is in New York, and kind of have the experience to be able to tell them that. So we bring the experience very often to the classroom, and we teach usually twice as many courses as tenure professors do. But I think we fill in an important gap that some students need to be filled in to be good practicing geotechnical engineers.
When you say that you teach twice as many, you have to like flex or something. There's got to be a move that goes along with that, just to show your might, I think, Daniel, because that's pretty good. We have fun questions on Director's Cut too. I mean, well, I always say that. I think they're fun. I hope everybody else thinks they're fun. We got to get to those. That's That's the important stuff here. This is what the people tune in for. We lead off with this for you, Daniel. What's the spiciest food you've ever eaten?
I mean, there's no question about that. My mother was Mexican, and it was whenever she cooked Mexican food. My mother was the type that not only she spiced the food, but when she was eating, she would actually have the chilies and went directly into the chili in her mouth. So the honor goes to my mother.
Now, important follow-up question though, because I think we've all had this experience where sometimes you eat things that are just so hot that they don't have much flavor profile beyond the spice. What do you remember about her cooking, or what was spicy but incredibly flavorful at the same time?
My mother was a great cook. So whenever she made carnitas or whatever, they were really, really delicious. But so she was kind enough to make the food slightly spicy in her mind, and then add, the nibbling on the chili for her to make it more spicy. But what I recall the most is my father calling certain soups she would make sopa de chile, because my father was Swiss and it was way too spicy for him. But I always found her food very, very, very flavorful.
Oh, that's amazing. So the third question is always the research and practice question, and we're going to touch a lot of bases on this one. I think this could pretty much be the rest of the interview, but we will get to the other questions. I promised everybody. We said that you're in Tokyo now. This was only one leg of a trip. You just got back from Palau. You're going to have to, first of all, explain to people where Palau is, what you did there, and then get into the geotechnical aspects of it, because it sounds like a masterclass in geology and many, many other topics. So, Daniel, tell us about Palau.
Okay, first, Palau is really, really hard to get to. If you look at where they have direct flights from, it's not too many places. Like from Tokyo, Haneda, they only have one flight per week. And Manila, I think it's 2 or 3 flights per week. So where is it? Well, you look in terms of longitude to Japan, and you start going south. When you reach the level of the Philippines, that's approximately where Palau is. So it's south of Guam, it's north of Australia, and as I said, it's a very small place. Population is 23,000 people. The capital Koror has 10,000 people, so not a lot of flights going into or out of Palau. It was always a dream for me to come here, both geotechnically, but also because I'm a diver. And when I organized a study abroad in Japan, that I took my students to places like Kobe, coinciding with the Geotechnical Earthquake Engineering Conference there, and visited some of the great facilities in Japan, I said to myself, you know what? After that study abroad, why not fly to Palau? And so that's how, I came to the islands of Palau. Can I share my screen, Brad?
Yeah, this is the first time this has happened on Director's Cut, by the way.
Okay. So if you've never seen what Palau looks like, these are some of the pictures that I took from my dive boat. And if you don't feel like you want to go there, well, there's something wrong. But absolutely marvelous, very interesting geologically. These are coral, coral limestone that has been uplifted from the bottom of the ocean. And you see everything, all the mechanisms of erosion that you typically have learned in geology classes. You see, for example, in this picture, the place where the wave action has undercut, the bottom of the island, creating kind of mushroom shapes. You see a lot of it's a very wet place. It rains a lot, so you see all the different structures, dome structures that are caused by rainfall erosion. So this is what they call the rock islands. You also see places where not only you have rock falls. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit on this one. Okay, along the cliffs, as you get the sea wave erosion, you have these vertical blocks that come down, or sometimes you get arches that form. In some of the islands, you see sinkholes. And if you're a diver like me, well, guess where you go? You go in those places because it's fun. Oops, I don't think it likes that picture. Okay, but it's here we are. But it's an absolutely wonderful place to visit, both geotechnically and if you're a diver for the marine life. It's been a sanctuary for sharks for decades, and the coral doesn't have. I couldn't see any sign of bleaching like you have in Australia, and in many places, I don't have pictures of that. You can actually see some of the structures that the Japanese created in terms of making tunnels, bases for seaplanes. You can still see a lot of the oil tanks that they stored in those locations. So a lot of relics from the Pacific War, and an absolutely beautiful place to go. Also because the edge of the reef is quite far away from the rock islands, the water is very shallow, but absolutely like a mirror. Well, you've seen it in all these pictures. So I encourage you, if you have the time, if you are ever, your trips take you towards Tokyo or Guam, to consider visiting the island.
That is fantastic. You also, because Director's Cut at its heart talks about three topics, and those are sports, music, and food, and we always come back to those three things. You shared some of your food tales from Palau too. I don't know if you want to pass any of those on to the people watching, because this is absolutely incredible to me. It sounds like you ate pretty well while you were there.
Well, if you love fish, Palau is one of the places to go. And the portions, first of all, are enormous. The locals like to eat a lot of food. So if you order fish, okay, in a restaurant, they'll serve you whatever they have. But typically it will be marlin, tunas, bluefin tuna, all sorts of large fish, and very, very cheap. I was telling a friend that I went to an all-you-can-eat little kind of hole-in-the-wall buffet, and they had, for $16, including tips and service and tax, they had all-you-can-eat bluefin tuna, sashimi, and other dishes. So crab, and it's not what I would call Michelin star type of presentation. Very simple presentation, but very, very good food. Very, very good fish.
So I think your commission check from the Tourism Council for Palau should be coming in the mail soon, because you've done a great job, and all of our viewers should be proceeding to their favorite flight travel website right now to see how they can book a trip there. So that was excellent. Thank you for sharing, and I'm really happy that you got to go and see that. But this being a world traveler is not a new thing for you. I wanted to ask you this question too. You got your grad degrees on different continents. I believe you got your master's degree in Switzerland and your PhD in Japan, if I got that right. Then you moved to the US after that to go into practice. So after getting your grad degrees on those different continents like that, what surprised you the most when you started working in the States?
Well, there were a couple of things. Early in my career, my biggest surprise was how specialized practice was in California. One of the first jobs I did, the company I was working for was called Lockwood Singh. The owner was Dr. Singh, the first PhD of Jim Mitchell. Well, maybe not the first, but one of the first. I remember being asked to help design the mat foundation. And I was specifically told to only do the geotechnical design. In places like Switzerland, the foundation engineer would not only design the mat foundation, but also the rebars. We would kind of do all the structural engineering. But here, on my first job, I was told, no, the rebars, we don't do that. You let the structure engineer handle that. And so that was kind of a new experience for me. In many other countries, you see, you had the civil engineer. In California, you had very, very strict limits between the geotech, the structural, and that was an unusual perspective for me. And I remember one time my boss, Dr. Singh, told me, well, there's two issues about that. Is specialty increases quality, but also having different trades diminishes your liability. And so learning about both quality and liability was one of my first surprises coming from abroad and starting practicing in the US. The second, and this is probably the big surprise of my life, was I had a great partner with his name was Glenn Rodd, with whom we created Prad Geotechnical in 1997. It was how easy it was to start a geotechnical business in the U.S. I remember we had to pay $800 to create a corporation, but basically with about $3,000 we were in business. And not only that, I mean, I've had friends from Switzerland who they had to pour in something like $50,000 to start a business. Okay. The other thing was how easy it was to convince people to hire us. If you think that a project takes, let's say, 3 years from the time you do your first boring to the time the project is completed, if you start a business, let's say in Europe, the clients will be very concerned that your business will remain in business for 3 years. Here in the U.S., people were, very, very open to, you start a business, no problem, okay? We don't know if you're going to be in business for very long, but we'll hire you. So that was, to me, a really, really big shock. And I think it really told me about why there's so many small business creation in the US compared to, let's say, places like Europe.
And I think the fear of failure in the US is much less than it is in a lot of the rest of the world as well. Because if you started that business here and it tanked in a year, in theory, you could go start another business the next day. And it's not that way. At least in Europe, it is definitely not that way. You're done for a while if you don't do well. So those are fascinating insights.
Well, not only that is, I think there's the idea here, I say here in the U.S. and I'm in Tokyo, in the U.S. that if you fail your business, you've learned something.
Yes.
And so the next time you'll do you'll do well. In Europe, if your business tanked, that's it. Nobody's going to hire because they expect you to fail again. So these optimism about the Japanese, the U.S. entrepreneurship is really an asset to the country.
Now, I swear I did not put this next question in here because we came off of two international ones. But with all this travel around the world throughout your life, at some point, you must have had to drive in some crazy situation. Daniel, what's the scariest place you've ever had to drive?
Well, when I was a graduate student in Japan, at the University of Tokyo, me and three friends, we bought this really tiny car that has a stick shift. Driving on the left, using a stick shift. That qualifies it.
Did you ever get used to? I mean, because with a stick shift, there's just all those motions that you learn because of the clutch and the different pedals and everything. That had to be incredibly difficult to essentially do that backwards. How did you do that?
Not very well. The toughest thing was that if you drive a stick shift, with your right hand, you're used to having first, I don't know if you can see my hand, but first, second, third in the right position. Well, when you're changing gears, with the other hand, your brain wants to do the mirror image, but it's wrong. The first, the second, the third are in the same position. So sometimes you're in third, you want to put third, but you put first, and sometimes you're in first, you put third.
Oh, that must have been great for the engine. Wow. I mean, you really threw a lot of variables at us there with driving in Tokyo, first of all. I mean, I know you're there now. That is not for the faint of heart. And then adding in all those other things. I don't know. No thanks.
Well, I grew up in Spain, and people drove quite aggressively. So driving aggressively has never concerned me too much. I've driven in Turkey, I've driven in Italy, in Lima, Peru. That's not a problem. But changing gears while driving on the left, even with the very polite Japanese all around you, was the hardest thing I ever did.
I like that a lot. We go now to the other question that we ask everybody when they come on the show, and that's how did you get involved originally with ASCE and then GI?
Well, I mean, I'm old enough, I did my undergrad in the 70s. When I became a member of ASCE, it was all about the journals. One of the graduate students next to me, he was a member of ASCE, and he would get the journals. And for me, it was about, okay, do I go to the library or do I borrow his journals? After a while, I wanted my own journals. And I also wanted to put my own Post-its and put in my own, pencil marks, desecrating, the journal. And so back in, I want to say around 86 or so, when I was in grad school, and in those days they had a great system. I don't know if they still do it, is if they had printed copies of previous years, they would sell them to you when you became a journal subscriber. They would give them to you at a really cheap price. I think I got like the 2 previous years for 1/3 of the price.
Wow.
And I think there was one issue that they didn't have, and so they gave me a little discount, for not having that particular issue. But it was a great way for ASCE to get rid of the old printed copies, okay, and for young engineers, young graduates to get the previous issues. And then when I left Japan and came to Los Angeles, we had a very, very active ASCE geotechnical section. And so that just kept me as an ASCE member, and it's been great throughout the years.
All the way to where you're a conference chair today, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later on in the interview. But that is a great story. And man, those old, I'm not that old, although I need to stop saying that because I'm going to start getting to the point where I am that old and I'll still be saying that. But that saving the trip to the library was a massive deal. And you hit it right on the head, having the copy that you could write in versus the one that you could only take off the shelf for a couple hours and you had to put back there at the end when you were done with it. That's a big deal. So that was a good one. I like that. I think you're the first person ever on the show to give the journal answer, but that was really good. We ask you to think way back on Director's Cut 2, and here's a nostalgia question for you, Daniel. What was your first hobby as a kid?
It was biking, by far. My father didn't like towns, so we lived in Spain, far from the city. And I had, there was no kids where I lived. I had to walk at least half an hour to see my closest friend. Closest to where we lived. Around there were tomato plants, from farmers and things like that. There was really nothing. And suddenly a friend of mine moved to a home that was within, I would say, 15 minutes in bicycle. And so I would bike to him, would bike to others, would spend the whole day on our bikes. We still talk about bicycle riding, almost more than 50 years later.
I think whenever there's a question like this on Director's Cut, or people have this nostalgia thing, right? It's always the answer always relates to freedom in some way, having the ability to go out and do your own thing, whether it was spending money or in your case, being able to travel somewhere on your own that would have been more difficult otherwise. So I always think that's kind of funny that it's when you're a little kid, that's a big deal though, like being able to do something on your own. And you painted a great picture there too with the tomato plants and everything. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember when the movie E.T. came out, and there's these kids in the bike. I was like, that's me, that's us. Without E.T., but that's us.
I remember when I first met you. You started at Ohio State around the same time that I started at GI, I think, and it took me a little while to realize that you were not a lifelong academic, that you'd been out in the wild of practice before that. And so that was, you'd been on campus, you'd been teaching before that. I think you said you taught at UCLA all the time you were in Southern California. But for you, what was the most challenging part of the transition from practice to being a full-time academic?
Faculty meetings. And the way decisions are taken in academia. In practice, one of the first things you learn is that making a bad decision is often better than making no decision.
Yeah.
You have always the option one, the option two, or the no option. The no option very often is the one that gets you into trouble. In academia, things are very, very different. First of all, you have an issue, you may discuss it for 3 years in faculty meetings before you make a decision. Coming from practices like, let's decide now. We've been discussing this for a long time. And I think that's true, not just at Ohio State, it's true everywhere. We think sometimes in practice we're being conservative. Forget it. Academia is a lot more conservative. I mean, Ohio State, for example, moved from quarters to semesters. And we still talk about some courses being organized the way they are because we used to be on quarters. But that was already old story when I joined in 2016. And when I was at UCLA and I started teaching there in 1988, we were saying the same thing about moving from semesters to quarters. And that change had happened, I don't know, 10 years before I joined UCLA. And still, many of the structures were legacy structures, if I may call it that way. So the slowness with which academia, or careful, from a practice perspective, being excessively careful about the changes we make, it was to me, how can I say, very, very surprising. And sometimes hard to accept, because you have a faculty meeting with maybe 35 people discussing that. If you're in practice, you say, okay, 35 times an hour, that's 35 man hours.
Well, that's
we've been discussing this issue for so long. You know, that's a lot of man hours. That means so much money. Academia doesn't consider the money. They want the right answer.
We're going to go to another question about the academic world and academic life, but specifically about Ohio State in this case. For people who are not from the Midwest or who haven't spent a lot of time there, the Big Ten campuses are pretty nice places. I think that's a general statement that you can safely make. What are the places that people should absolutely not miss on the Ohio State campus?
Okay, well, if you are either a geotech or Harry Potter fan, you should visit Orton Hall. First of all, that building looks just like a building out of Harry Potter. It's all made of big granite stones. You enter the building, it had a dinosaur. A little bit, it's from the Jurassic period, and then it has the geology library inside, which is number one, the most quiet library on campus, and it has all the geologic maps for the entire country, but also more specific ones for Ohio, and then it has the Geologic Museum, where they have a lot of the rocks and fossils from Ohio and other places too. So that's the place to go. And it's just south of the Oval, which is our big central location on campus. And if you haven't seen it, Brad, next time you're on campus, okay, you let me know and I'll take you there.
I would love that. I think one of the things that also makes the Ohio State campus really unique is within the Big Ten, only Ohio State and University of Minnesota have truly urban campuses. They're the only ones that are in major cities. And that kind of gives it a different flavor, I think, as well, that you're in the middle of it's a massive state institution in the middle of a big city. And that is such a unique feel.
Well, that's for the main campus, but we also have, for example, the Ohio State airport, which is slightly off campus. We have the Arnold Palmer design golf courses, which are also a little bit off campus. And then we have the satellite campuses. I think last time I checked, we had a total of 65,000 students. So we have, for example, a campus in Lima, Ohio, where students can do for engineering the first 2 years, and then transferred to the main campus. So it's a lot bigger than people realize, and a lot more widespread than people realize. But the most beautiful parts of all the campuses is, you're right, the urban campus in Columbus.
I will definitely make a trip back, and especially if it involves a geology museum. I am a sucker for campus geology museums, and we made it through to the last question, and it has to be about Geo-Extreme 2025. We're about to, I feel like we've been saying this for a few months, we're about to open the call for abstracts. We're about to get going. Geo-Extreme happened in 2021 in Savannah for the first time. We're going to be in Long Beach in 2025 in the fall. Daniel, why should people be planning to attend Geo-Extreme 2025?
Well, number one is, if you watch the news, you can not avoid extreme precipitations like they're having now in South Florida, wildfires like they've had even in Canada, but a lot of them in the west of the U.S., all the debris flows, earthquake damage like the recent earthquake in Japan, landslides, well, they're all over the country, and the changing climate we have are making these one of the main areas of practice of geotechnical engineers. Now, one of the things that we tried very hard for the first Geo-Extreme conference is to really create what I would call a multidisciplinary forum. And that is not only bring in the geotechs who work in the professions, but also climate scientists, emergency managers, resilience and sustainability investigators, people from things like insurance markets, also people who are policymakers, people from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and many other branches, so that we could have a really, really meaningful discussion. It's nice to see when you're talking, when you see a group of people talking, like somebody may be a geotechnical earthquake engineering expert who's talking with somebody from the insurance company who are trying to evaluate risk, and maybe also somebody who is the LAUSD or Department of Water and Power type of individual. These sort of conversations need to happen, not just in the top of the company, but also the young engineers need to hear about this. And one thing that was very successful, although we had limited attendance because of COVID in the first Geo-Extreme, was this sort of conversations. Although it was a very successful conference, the first Geo-Extreme in Savannah, people from New Zealand couldn't come. People from Japan couldn't come. People, for example, in Japan, who became experts on debris management because of the Tohoku earthquake, couldn't come. And I mean, they could send their paper, okay, but they couldn't come because of the logistics of COVID. And we still had over 300 people who attended. So you need to come in to have those conversations and maybe open your mind to other disciplines than the very, how can I say, narrow one that sometimes we get involved when we're really looking at the tree and not seeing the forest because of the scope of the project that we were involved. So I encourage everybody to come and keep in mind that climate change is not going away; it's getting worse, and so we're going to have a lot more, unfortunately, extreme events that are going to necessitate the geotech community to meet and talk with a much wider disciplinary type of community.
Well said. And I mean, all the plenary presentations from Geo-Extreme 2021 are up on the GI YouTube channel. And the one that I enjoyed the most, to make your point here, was one of the senior executives from Georgia Ports was there and did a keynote one morning, and it was fascinating. And I think one of the reasons why it was fascinating is because a lot of people in the room thought he was going to get up and talk a lot about, we'll call them traditional hazards. And it wasn't about that at all. It went down this completely different path where he starts talking about wind and how that was like their biggest challenge that they had to deal with. It was a fascinating presentation, and they all were fascinating in their own ways. We will have a very big announcement about Geo-Extreme 2025 coming very soon, so you want to keep your eyes peeled for that, as well as the launching of the website, the opening of the call for abstracts, exhibit and sponsorship sales, all kinds of other stuff. You want to be with us in Long Beach in November 2025. It's going to be an amazing time. So Daniel, you made it through all 10 questions, and we navigated the time difference with aplomb. I think it's, you're a day ahead of me over there now, and technically for you, you're doing this on Saturday and I'm still on Friday night. But look at that. We even made it across days with no problems. For our viewers, if you liked what you saw, and I always say you're here at the end, so you probably did, click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Daniel, thank you so much for doing this. I hope it was fun.
Oh, it was really fun. And it was especially fun going over all the countries we've gone in the last 30 minutes.
I knew we'd hit a lot, so
I think we missed Antarctica. If we ever do this again,
we'll have
you or me have to go to Antarctica.
And again, for all of our viewers, it is almost our Director's Cut summer break. We'll have only one episode left before we go away for a few months and do something else. So you want to make sure you tune in for that, a brand new episode of Director's Cut next week.